View from the Gutters presents Singles Club, Episode 4. Welcome to View from the Gutters presents Singles Club, the special mini-show where we review an independent or small press comic book. Welcome to Singles Club. I'm your host, Tobiah. Since Easter was just this past Sunday, I've decided to pull this week's title specially off the review pile. For this week's episode, we're looking at Holy F***, drawn by Daniel Arruda Massa and written by Nick Marino. It's published by Danger Zone, an imprint of Action Lab Entertainment. Action Lab seems to be a pretty small studio, which released its first comic in 2011. However, their second title was the excellent all-ages title Princeless, which I believe has been pitched on the main show, and if you haven't read that, you should definitely check it out immediately. So I read Holy F***, and holy fuck, this comic is definitely not for the sensitive or faint of heart. Let's start with the cover. We've got a collage of characters here, all assuming sort of action-y poses. There's a bearded guy with a toga who's shaking his fist, an Egyptian-looking lady snarling, a mustachioed devil man with a bad case of sass butt, a nun with a shotgun, and some long-haired bearded dude with a cross tattoo holding a pistol out. There's a birdie kind of guy in the background, and also the long-haired guy appears two more times kind of faded out in the background, where he's riding a motorcycle, and then another one where he's straddling a missile while firing a machine gun. Between the title and the cover, I think we've got a pretty good idea of what we're getting into with this comic. Yes, this is a satirical and violent comic starring that first action hero, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, I don't know about you, but the gritty/extreme Jesus trope is something that I personally feel is a little bit overplayed at this point. I think partly that's because as a concept, it's something which seems easy, but isn't. And thus you end up with a lot of underskilled writers who confuse premise with punchline. You take a figure like Jesus, or Buddha, or Mr. Rogers, who is known in life as a contemplative, empathetic, caring person, and you invert them into a violent, swearing asshole, and this reversal of expectations is funny. Like a kindly old grandmother saying the word fuck. It's just kind of amusing on the face of itself. But once you've established that premise, you then have to go out and do something funny with it, and that's where a lot of these kinds of stories tend to fall down. Once you have the concept of biker Jesus driving around shooting people, there's not that many different places you can go with it. And so you often see the same ground being tread and retread by people who had a good idea, but don't quite know how to execute it effectively. On top of that, there's the problem that Christian mythology is something that a lot of people in Western culture still take very seriously. This is a part of our contemporary lives. And thus it has a stronger cultural weight than something like Thor does. You know, Marvel can take the mythological figure of Thor, who was a very important god in people's lives, and turn him into a comic book character and nobody really bats an eye. On that level, it's hard to take a figure like Jesus strictly as a fictional character. On some level, any representation of Jesus is a political statement, whether you're playing him straight or taking the piss. So based on the title and cover, I went into this book with a certain set of expectations in place. The book itself begins with the nun from the cover, Sister Maria. She's tied to a stake, and her clothes have been ripped for maximum scantiliness. And she is being interrogated by Zeus and Isis, the Greek and Egyptian gods, also pictured on the cover. And they are demanding that she convert to worshiping them. And she refuses, and Jesus busts in, guns a-blazing. And then we immediately jump like a week back in time. Flashback. We see Sister Maria finding Jesus in a seedy Tokyo karaoke hotel I don't know if karaoke hotels are actually a thing, but it's a hotel and it says karaoke on it. And Jesus is there, buck naked, sucking on a bong with 2 naked prostitutes on his arms. And apparently the old gods, like Zeus, are planning to start the apocalypse up because they're sick and tired of Jesus getting all the worship. They figure if they make the world a shitty enough place, then mankind will turn back to them. And they plan to accomplish this with nuclear missiles. So far, so good. Sister Maria and Jesus need to figure out how to stop the apocalypse, and so they seek out the 3rd member of their team, Belial the demon, who also happens to be Jesus's lover? Boyfriend? ? Not exactly clear, except for the fact that they get kind of busy pretty quick. That's a thing that happens in this. I'm not going to spoil the rest of the story, except Belial apparently has a flying saucer that he took from some aliens that he murdered. So that is also a thing. You can kind of fill in the rest of the details for yourself. It kind of establishes a paradigm, and then it runs with that paradigm. So I wasn't super expecting to enjoy the book, given the premise. I've read things like this before, and they've always been kind of good. But in the end, I've actually found myself really enjoying it. The story isn't especially complex, but neither is it particularly serious. The jokes are amusing, the dialogue is snappy, and the story keeps moving at a good pace. But I think what really sold this book for me is the cartoony, exaggerated artwork. There's a particular page where Sister Maria is screaming at Jesus and Belial to stop tonguing each other. And the juxtaposition of her massively exaggerated screaming head with the look of mild shock and surprise on their faces was just hilarious to me. You'll have to look at the website to see the preview images to really understand what I'm talking about. But Belial in general was the star of the book for me. Just looking at his design, he's wearing a polo shirt, bike shorts, socks with flip-flops, and a fanny pack. Paired with his mustache, glasses, and these teeny tiny little angel wings, and you just can't help but laugh at him because he is totes adorbs. In general, I really enjoyed Daniel Massa's artwork throughout this book. The colors are bright, and the characters all have this same sort of short, squat quality to them that gave the book a lighthearted air, which really served to balance out the grittiness, which is something that I think is often missing from the equation in these sorts of books. It's kind of like a 5-year-old holding up a toy sword and swearing bloody vengeance. On some level, you just can't take that seriously, and you have to laugh at it. This book also reminded me a bit of God Hates Astronauts, which we just recently read for the main show, in terms of the relentlessness of the humor. It's not quite on the same level of straight-up insanity, but there's a moment in this book where you sort of break down and just surrender to the madness. If you read it, I think you will recognize that moment when you see it. There is one small thing that I do have to complain about, though, which is a scene with a parody of Ellen DeGeneres named Helen Degenerate. The scene itself is fine, but the name Degenerate was what a lot of homophobes were calling Ellen when she first came out of the closet back around 1997. That kind of crossed the line for me between amusing riff on a name and literally just a hateful thing that actually happened. And it's not a big deal, given that this was almost 20 years ago. I considered that the authors might not be old enough to actually remember it, which I kind of find disturbing in its own right, Jesus Christ. But it stuck out to me as a little bit tone deaf, and were I editing this book, it's something that I would have probably asked if they could figure out another way to do that. Other than that, this is a fun, lighthearted read that doesn't take itself too seriously. As long as you don't take it too seriously either, I think you'll have fun with it. As always, we've got preview images up on viewfromthegutters.com, and Holy Fuck is available on Comixology for $2 per issue, of which there are 4. And I believe it is available in print as well. A trade of those 4 issues should be available digitally very soon, and a print trade paperback will be in stores in about a month, which is to say early May 2015. Thanks for listening, everybody, and I hope you'll join me again next time for another episode of Singles Club. Bye. Thank you for listening to this presentation of View from the Gutters. View from the Gutters is featured on theouthousers.com and the Comics Podcast Network. Keep up to date with everything that we're doing on our website at viewfromthegutters.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes, as it does help new listeners find our show. Thanks for listening, everybody. And as always, keep reading.